this has been the technological nightmares from. We won't finish that sentence. Day. Sorry we're late, but welcome to Trinity Talk Live. The computer that we do the video conferencing on that feeds Ben in here decided, 5 minutes for airtime, that's a good time to crash. It's a nightmare. So I apologize, but we are finally live. Trinity Talk Live, water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective. We also tried to work something out so that I wasn't hearing an audio delay in my headphones, and we couldn't work it out. So if I start pausing here and there throughout the day, it's because I'm hearing my own voice through my headphones, but a split second delayed from when I'm actually talking. And it confuses me and it gives me a headache. So I apologize if I go off track here at all. But hey, welcome to Trinity Talk Live. I'm Ken Coughlin, and this person is
Ben Lander.
That's Ben Lander. And to my left is my lovely wife, and I just want to make sure that all the technical aspects that went wrong were my fault. She's doing a beautiful job so far, and she's going to do better than last week with switching us back and forth, right? Kidding. All right. So anyway, thank you for joining us here today. We have a lot of really cool things to talk about. We said at the end of last week that we wanted the show today to be less about coronavirus stuff. But as we've quickly discovered, everything right now is about coronavirus stuff. So we kind of set the goal for coronavirus adjacent stories. Stories that aren't necessarily directly about the virus, but are adjacent to it. But before we get started on all that, I do want to remind everybody that we are live. So if you're watching us live, please go ahead and comment in the live chat. Mary Kay is going to be monitoring the live chat, and she'll be able to fill us in.
Your audio is going in and out.
My audio is going in and out? My audio shouldn't be going in and out. I don't know.
Maybe a little bit crackly.
Peaking because I'm talking too loud. Maybe I'll be a little bit quieter. You couldn't hear any of that through the headphones? You're right. It says I'm not going out. Now can you hear me?
Yes.
You can hear me, but I'm probably echoey, right?
You're always echoey.
I love you too. All right, so that was a quick fix. Sorry, the audio quality is not going to be as good because for one reason or another, my standalone mic here is not working. So you're going to hear me through regular video conferencing. So
they can also hear me.
They can hear you through video. You don't need to worry about your mic. You'll be picked up through here. It's going to be a regular video conference episode. Yeah, this has not been a good morning for technological issues, but hey, we're all going. We're live. Let's try that again. I don't know how much you heard. Maybe you just saw my mouth moving with no words coming out earlier. But what I was saying was we are live. So please, if you're watching us live, go ahead and comment in the live chat. Tell us if you have any questions about anything we're talking about, any comments about what you think about any of the topics we're talking about today, or if you have certain things you just want us totally different topics you want us to cover, put them in the live chat. Mary Kay is going to be monitoring the live chat throughout the show, and she will chime in periodically and fill us in on your questions or comments. So without further ado, what I had mentioned before, and again, you might not have been able to hear me because my mic not have been working, but the stories today, as much as we wanted things to be not coronavirus related, pretty much everything in the news is coronavirus related. So we targeted coronavirus adjacent stories, meaning stories that were not directly about the virus itself, but maybe more about its impact or how we respond to it, things like that. And getting into our first story of the day, I'm going to have to try to pull this up because, again, with all the technical stuff that was going on, normally I have all the stories sitting in front of me. I did not have the opportunity to do that today. What?
Get Ben to do it.
Ben doesn't know the story, really.
Oh.
So I've got 4 of them pulled up. One of them.
You got 4 of them pulled up?
Which one with?
I can introduce the first one because it's just, we can't, normally, Ben, I ask you, what order you want to do them in, but because this is now live, the slides are already made up. So we're doing in the order the slides say we're doing them in. And so the first one I wanted to talk about, let me see if I can find where I sent it to Ben. And this was actually one that didn't really come from a news story per se, as much as, when I'm talking, I'm going to take these off. So, and if Ben starts talking, I'll see his lips moving and then I'll put them back on again. It doesn't really come from news stories as much as something I've seen circulating around a couple Facebook groups that I'm a member of, that I'm a part of, specifically here within the North American Lutheran Church. And for those of you that are, some of you may watching may be members here of Trinity, some may not. Especially if you're a member of Trinity, I'll tell you that we're already kind of taking advantage of these things. But if you're not, this is really good advice. If you haven't heard about the CARES Act that passed last week by Congress, it has a lot of financial aid, loan provisions, things like that, especially some for small business. There are specifically some small business loans in there that are available for businesses, including churches, that have 500 or fewer than 500. I can't remember how it works exactly, employees. And they're loans that are designed to help you keep payroll basically going, to keep your employees. And you can use some of the money for some other things like rent and things like that as well, or mortgage. But primarily, this particular loan is designed to help you continue to meet your payroll obligations. And so I found it very interesting that a couple pastors in some of these groups that I was a member of started asking some really good questions about how churches, the ethics or whatever of churches utilizing these loans. And here's one. I'm not going to read it word for word, but this one particular pastor said that he's got a congregation, for example, that is not in horrible financial straits right now. They're actually doing okay. Their giving has been keeping up reasonably well through the first part of this crisis. And so his thought process was, well, depending on how long this goes on, however, that might not always be the case. So what are the ethics of him on behalf of his congregation applying for these payroll continuation loans? And in essence, it's a situation where right now they can meet payroll. But the growing thought out there is that it's going to be on a first come, first served basis, and this money's going to run out. So if he doesn't apply for the money now, then he might not be able to later when he does need it. So is it ethically appropriate for him to apply for the loan now, even though they don't necessarily need the money, use that loan money for the payroll, and then kind of stockpile money, I guess, for later on in case things happen? And the other one, another pastor asked a related question that I also found interesting, and that was, he's also in a situation where he doesn't necessarily need the loan money right now, but he was thinking, well, what happens if I go through this whole time period? It's like an 8-week time period they're checking on, or they're providing the money for. What happens if I go through this 8-week time period and I never need the money for the loan? Well, this particular loan has the ability to be forgiven if you can use the money for that purpose, and you can show that you've kept all your employees on and you've kept them at their salaries and things like that, that you can actually have the loan forgiven so you don't have to pay it back, or maybe you just only have to pay back any interest that's accrued, but that's it. And so he said, well, what's the ethics of that? Let's say that, it's all a bookkeeping shell game. I can show that I, kept my employees on, I kept them at their full salaries. But now I still have a surplus of money if the giving kept up. So what do I do with this surplus of money? Is it ethical of me then to ask for the loan to be forgiven, or should I pay back the loan? And if I can't ask for the loan to be forgiven, could I maybe ask for it to be forgiven and then use that money for some other COVID-19 related charity, something like that? And so it's posing some ethical questions, I think, for churches to consider when thinking about these loans. And first thing I want to say is, if your church does need the assistance, if the giving's not up there, I would encourage you to apply for these loans like today, because the money is going to run out. But what if you get in a situation where it turns out you didn't need it? Then, should you apply for it now? If you're having the giving staying up right now, even if you should apply for it, what if you don't end up needing the money for it? Then what do you do with that money? Do you ask for the loan to be forgiven? So since Ben is the most ethical person on this show right now, because my wife's not talking, see how I did that? I'm going to let him answer those questions. So Ben, what do you think? I'm going to put the headphones on so I can hear you.
Well, first I'm going to start off and say that I do not have the answer for this. It's kind of a, ethical dilemma here. I will say, what Trinity's doing, Ken, like you've said, we've already applied for some of these. I think it's within the realms of each congregation, each pastor, and each finance committee to look at their specific congregation situation, whether or not they need these loans, whether or not they think they would need them. I think they would be within their ethical rights, so to speak, if they think at some point they would need it, to apply for it now. I know I did see the point when one of the pastors had made it, said, how is that much different than hoarding toilet paper? I get his point. I don't think it's exactly the same, because there is this actually has a very real possibility of running out. I don't think toilet paper companies have said anything about running out anytime soon. But also, it's specifically for small businesses. It's not like you're taking it away from, well, I guess you could say you're taking it away from other small businesses that might need it, that might not apply until a later date. So it's difficult, and I'm not going to presume to say that I know the answer. I will say Trinity has started on this. Now, the other thing, too, is for churches to keep in mind, if it cannot be forgiven and they have to pay it back, which it seems like it can be forgiven, but if it can't be, you don't want to be putting your financial strain on your congregation, because some of these loans carry, I think, like 4% interest or even higher. So you don't want to, correct me if I'm wrong on that.
I think it was originally supposed to be 4%, but I think they might have just modified that. And I think the latest is down to 1%, if I remember correctly. But there's still interest on it.
Okay, right. So, but regardless, you don't want to put a financial strain on your congregation. So yeah, there's a lot of unknown variables, a lot of unknown factors, and the bottom line is, and also in this case, I'm sure has been brought up or will be brought up, is, shouldn't we be trusting God to provide for us and not the government? So where does that fit into this as well? Where's our faith? I do think God will provide, right? God is going to continue to see his gospel spread regardless of what happens. He could provide financially through the government in some cases.
Yeah, this might be his helicopter.
Yeah, one of the other pastors in the group that I saw this from made that exact same point. Is that you ever heard that analogy of the story about the man who's in a flood and the rain's coming down and he's on first a police officer comes and knocks on his door and says, hey, it's gonna the floodwaters, everybody needs to evacuate, we need to get you out of here. And he says, no, trust me, I trust my God, my God's gonna provide. So the police officer says, okay, I can't make you come with me. And then the floodwaters come up, and finally he's on like the first floor roof, and this person in a boat comes up and he says, come on, the floodwaters are rising, you got to get out of here. And says, no, I trust my God's going to provide. And says, okay, well, we can't make you come. And they leave, and the floodwaters get higher and higher. And then he's actually on his roof, the second story roof, and a helicopter comes and says, oh, come on, the floodwaters are really high, we got to get you out of here. He says, no, I trust my God's going to provide. And he says, okay, and they leave him, and the guy dies, and he goes to heaven, and he turns to God, he says, God, I trusted you, I thought you were going to provide for me. He says, sure, I did provide. What do you think the police officer, the boat, and the helicopter were for? So maybe an argument could be made that this is the government, or this is God, one way of God's providing for us in these times. So. My headphones are back on, that means you're talking again, Ben.
Okay. Yeah, no, and I think you're right. I think it's prudent to be, like Jesus says, to be gentle as doves, shrewd as a serpent. And sometimes with that shrewdness, we don't like that word necessarily to be shrewd, but just to be practical and to be the best steward as we possibly can, requires looking at all the available options and making the best informed decision. Specifically, well, I mean, the first thing we should do is pray about it. Let's back up a little bit. We should be praying about it, seeking discernment, but then, of course, doing our due diligence as well, which includes looking at all the available options.
Yeah, and I don't really think I blame anybody. First of all, the question of whether to apply for the loans, even if your giving is going up, is or not going up, but is maintaining right now. I don't have any problem with somebody applying for the loan, personally. I look at it that, yes, things may be going that way right now, but if history is a teacher of anything, it's that levels in times of need, like any time of a disaster, you always see these celebrities going on TV, and they'll have some big, massive fundraiser, and people give a whole bunch of money right up to the front end. But then as a month down the line, 2 months down the line, the giving wanes off. It's not there so much anymore. And so I do think, and as a practical matter, people are going to, more and more people, if they do end up losing their jobs, because let's say these small business loans, the money runs out, for example, people may just not be in a position to maintain their level of giving as their income gets reduced. And so I don't really have a problem with a church filing for these loans right now anticipatorily. The question that becomes, well, what do you do with that money if you is it right to ask for it to be forgiven and then give it to some other charity, maybe a COVID-19 related charity, maybe a charity to help other small businesses or people who weren't able to apply for the loan or weren't able to keep their jobs to the loan. I don't think it's an easy question, and so I don't fault pastors or congregations or churches either way, if they decide, yes, we're going to apply for forgiveness, or no, we're not going to apply for forgiveness. That sounds wrong in a Christian context, doesn't it? We're going to, have ask for the loan to be forgiven, or not ask for the loan forgiven to repay it. I think either one is, if handled appropriately, is an appropriate way to handle it, in my opinion. So, anything else on that?
Yeah, and I would just say that kind of gets into the realm of what's legally right or legally correct versus what's morally correct. Is there some kind of clause in these loans that says if you ask for forgiveness and there are remaining funds that needs to be repaid? I'm not sure. I'm not acquainted with that as much.
All right. Well, let's move on to story number 2 here. And story number 2, I'm going to pull this one up here. I'm going to take the headphones off again. For those that were watching at the very beginning, my issue with the headphones is that I'm hearing myself, but slightly delayed, and it gives me a headache. So let's see, where's the other one I sent to Ben on this one? This is seriously, I'm supposed to be in the right folder. When did I send that to you? I can't hear you right now anyway, because my headphones aren't on. There's that. I have no idea where it is, so I'm just going to wing it. So the basic story is there was, obviously most people know that New York City is being particularly hard struck by the coronavirus. And one thing they've started doing to help their hospital system is outside groups are actually setting up portable hospitals, like in tents, in various different areas throughout the city. Well, one of these organizations that is setting up these portable hospitals is Samaritan's Purse. And for those that aren't familiar with Samaritan's Purse, it's obviously a Christian charity. Its CEO or president, I don't remember how they title themselves, is Franklin Graham. And most of us know them from like Operation Christmas Child. They run that Operation Christmas Child with little shoe boxes and all that. But they also have portable hospitals that they will use, to my understanding, throughout the world, any place that needs it. They can travel to a place in need to provide hospital services. Well, in this instance, the need is right here at home. And so they're actually setting up camp in New York City to help over the overwhelmed hospital system with these COVID-19 patients. There was an article, and again, I can't pull it up, so I want to say it was, no, I don't want to say because I could be wrong. I can't remember the
It's on the
website.
Daily Beast.
Ben, if you have it, when I get my headphones back on, you can fill this in for me. But tell them to go to what? Say what? Where? So you have the website pulled up?
Yeah.
What's the article from?
So the article's from the Daily Beast.
Okay, that's what I was going to say, but
The what?
The Daily Beast is the name of the website. And I'll just give the general gist of it, and then Ben, you can fill in anything that I'm getting wrong or missing since you have the article in front of you. But the general gist of it was this author was, I thought, kind of talking out of both sides of his mouth a little bit, because in one breath he's saying, yeah, we don't fault the doctor. We have no qualm with the doctors who are in these tents for Samaritan's Purse doing the work. They're putting themselves at risk. We get it. We're not saying the Samaritan's Purse shouldn't be there and that we shouldn't be allowing them to be there. But we're saying that certain people, certain minority groups, my wife brought it up for me, thank you very much, should be very concerned. The headline here is New York. Then we got a pop-up window came up over it. Go away. New Yorkers are right to be skeptical of evangelical-run coronavirus ward in Central Park. Franklin Graham's religious organization has done good around the world, but it's not wrong to question whether his history of bigotry could get in the way of caring for the sick. And specifically what's talking about is we talked about this a few episodes ago about the way certain people are taking Franklin Graham's positions and calling them, Islamophobic, homophobic, things like that. And this article specifically mentioned that if you're a Muslim and you're being treated at this hospital, you have a right to be concerned, a legitimate right to be concerned about whether or not you're going to get the same level of medical care that a Christian would get. If you're somebody from the LGBT community, you have a legitimate concern about whether you're going to get the same level of care that someone from the Christian community would get. And I mean, obviously my immediate reaction was, if that's really what you think, then you don't understand Christianity. But let me throw this over to you, Ben. What was your impression when you saw this story?
I would agree with your assessment that the author is kind of speaking out of both sides of their mouth. Now, I did a little bit more digging on, I think it was on the Samaritan's Purse website, about where all they're doing these. And as far as I could tell, there's only 2. There's one in Central Park in New York, and there's one in Italy that they've already set up. And I didn't come across any of the one in Italy that got any flack. It's really all for the one in New York. in Central Park. And yeah, you're right that the main accusation or the main concern seems to be not necessarily what the organization is doing, because at some points in this article they say, yes, everybody should, we shouldn't discriminate who can provide care. Everybody should be able to provide care, especially at this time. But then at the same time, they're saying specifically Muslims and LGBTQ people should be concerned about the level of treatment that they'll be getting, even though it states in here that the Samaritan's Purse had to sign a written pledge to treat all patients equally. So regardless of whether or not you're familiar with Christianity, regardless of whether or not how much faith you put in Christians to do the right thing, the fact that there's a legally binding document saying that they're going to treat everybody equally should be enough to assuage some of the fears that people have. I do find it interesting that, well, there's one part in the article that I took especially issue with,
Mm-hmm.
and that was when, let's see if I'll just read this paragraph excerpt from it. It says, even some conservative Christians who've acknowledged the disturbing nature of Graham's comments have attacked Samaritan's Purse's critics for intolerance. Anyone should be able to help anyone in this time, the argument goes. It's wrong to prevent people from serving the sick. I totally agree, but Samaritan's Purse does not. The organization is requiring that all personnel serving in its pop-up hospital be Christians who agree to Samaritan's Purse's 11-point statement of faith, which includes the belief that non-Christians will burn in hell and that same-sex relationships are sinful. So that last sentence right there is very, I guess, inflammatory and kind of a distortion, because if you pull up what their statement of faith, the link is right there on the article. The statement of faith is orthodox. It goes through, yes, it has a statement about just Christianity in general. It has scripture references to back it up. Does talk about marriage. It doesn't say that all same-sex relationships, it implies same-sex relationships are sinful by stating that marriage is between one organic male, one organic female. It states the sanctity of marriage, which then implies that, same-sex relationships are sinful. And then also that non-Christians will burn in hell. Again, it doesn't say that. It talks about final judgment and everything. So it's kind of, yes, I guess implied, but it's written in such a way in this article that is kind of inflammatory and designed to get a rise out of people. And so I have a couple more things to say, but Ken, it looks like you have something.
Well, an interesting thought. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, I know that the statement of faith doesn't say what they say it said. You're talking about it implies maybe. Obviously, as Christians, we believe Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through Him. And so there is one way to salvation, and that is through Jesus Christ. You either accept it or you don't. All right, and there's two destinations. You're going one place or the other. Okay, in that sense. But to me, and maybe this is maybe I'm overthinking it, but I'm thinking, okay, if you're a Christian charity and you really think that people that haven't accepted Jesus Christ are going to hell, all right, isn't that all the more reason to give them great medical care, because you don't want them to be going there? I mean, that's the other point, is that, we want to keep you alive and so that you can have more opportunities to accept Jesus Christ. So it seems to me their Christian faith would actually have inspire them, even assuming what the article said was true, would be an inspiration for them to provide even better medical care. If somebody comes in, they're a Christian, they've already accepted Jesus, like, oh, well, hey, they can die. We know where they're going. That's okay. I mean, we wouldn't do that, obviously, but right. But that's kind of my point, is that what you're using to ascribe to them a motive to give people lesser care, even accepting meaning the author's arguments on its face, your argument doesn't hold up. It doesn't match up. So anyway, that's a thought based on one thing you said, but go ahead. You said you had more you want to comment on?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a good point too. The other thing there being, I've said this before in our Trinity Talk articles, if you are a non-Christian, or specifically like an atheist or somebody who doesn't believe in God's existence, why are we concerned with whether or not same-sex relationships are sinful? If somebody else is labeling it as sinful and you don't believe in sin or the problem of sin, then what's the problem for you, the non-Christian? I guess their problem is that they feel like it will change the way that they treat people, which, again, to your point, all the more reason to treat people. And I guess they're saying, he did say in this article that they want to accept the care while not being proselytized at the same time, which Samaritan's Purse has said repeatedly that they're first and foremost a Christian organization. And it's in their statement of faith that they believe in the call to evangelism, that we are called to spread the gospel because we're a Christian organization.
Yeah, but that gets to another cultural issue that I have always banging my head against the wall about, and that's this mentality that we have out there that even hearing something we disagree with is somehow offensive. And I saw some Facebook post the other day that commented that said, "Hey, explain to me exactly how you were harmed by the fact you had to hear something that you didn't agree with." So I mean, I get it, but I just don't see where that, especially in the grand scheme of things right now, and it's also somewhat inconsistent because everything's a worldview. And I mean, whether you're trying to force someone to say something or force someone not to say something, you're still imposing your views upon them. And that's the change. So even in them saying that we don't think you should be able to share the gospel in your privately owned hospital facility or whatever, even that is them trying to enforce their views upon Samaritan's Purse. And so you can't get around it one way or the other. We have freedom of expression. But I also don't think that, Samaritan's Purse is sitting there saying, well, you sign off in this waiver saying that you agree to hear the entire gospel message or we're not going to treat you. I sincerely doubt that's going on. So anyway, I interrupted you again. Go ahead.
No, that's good input. I think the other thing, yeah, you're right. They're not requiring anybody who's being treated to sign anything. They do have on their sign up on the website, the Samaritan's Purse website, that the personnel that are administering aid should be Christians and agree to their statements of faith. But again, this is all voluntary, right? This is a voluntary action. So anybody who's going there to apply, you would think. Now, and I've looked up a couple other things. There are other pop-ups. So like I said, Samaritan's Purse has the two, one in New York and one in Italy. There are plenty of other organizations that are doing field hospitals, but I mean, a lot of them are military run, and they're for kind of backup if the hospitals get overrun. But there's plenty of other options for non-Christians who are medical professionals to still provide the help that they're seeking to provide.
Well, the other thing this makes me think of is, obviously part of and you're better at quoting scripture than I am, and so you might be able to come up with some of these off the top of your head. But part of what we're called to do is to show love to the world, even those, even non-Christians. We show love to everybody, and it's through our love that we stand out from others, and so that should get the attention of the non-believing world to say, "Hey, look how these Christians are living. Look what these Christians are doing," and I think this is just an example where that's exactly what Samaritan's Purse is trying to do. But even though when you live in a fallen world, even sometimes when you're doing that, people are still, if they really are opposed to the gospel, they're even going to try to use your loving acts against you in some way, shape, or form. I don't know. That's just the thought that crossed my mind on it. So,
yeah, I mean, look at the words of Christ. They will know you are my disciples if you have love for one another, if you have love for the world. And so you're right. We are known. Christians should be known for their love. And again, the issue, even this article admits, they're not taking issue with the action that Samaritan's Purse is doing. They're taking issue with its message, right? So it comes back to the gospel is what's offending them. And so they're taking issue with that. And that goes back to your point that you had made earlier about belief systems, worldviews. They're all, and something that I thought that I had while reading this is that any worldview or belief system by nature is exclusive, right? So people take issue with Christianity being exclusive, but imagine, for example, that a Muslim organization would to do the same thing, set up a field hospital and say, which by the way, Muslims, Orthodox Islam has the same view on homosexuality as Christianity. Orthodox Muslims will say that homosexuality is a sin as well. So, and I have a hard time thinking that as much of an issue would be raised with that, because by nature of somebody accepting a set of beliefs, you're automatically rejecting other ones that contradict it. So, everybody is exclusive at some point. Marriage itself, take sexual orientation out of the equation by selecting one person, one mate that you're going to be with. You're forsaking all others. So everybody comes to a point where they are excluding other people, and that's kind of where this whole facade of tolerance and everybody has to be included and everything really kind of breaks down for me.
Yeah. I think Ravi Zacharias said at one point that even the Baha'i faith, which claims to be inclusive of everybody, even they exclude the exclusivists. So I mean, in most of those, we won't get into a comparative religions lecture here, but most of those religions that claim to be inclusive actually only do so at the expense of completely rewriting what the belief systems are, the various different worldviews that they try to include. So, all right. First of all, say hi to Andrew. I don't know if he's still watching, but Andrew was watching. He commented.
Hey, Andrew. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for joining us. If anybody else wants to let us know that you're watching, feel free to put in the comments if you have any questions as we go along. We'd be happy to try to answer them. So we've gone through 2 of our stories here today. We're going to move on to number 3. And Ben, I'm going to let you introduce this one, but I'll tell you which one it is because you can't see the byline that's going on below. This is the one about the Southern Baptist Convention and the United Methodist Church and their convention. So take it away. Tell us what we're talking about next.
Yeah, so this article, well, it's in a couple different places, but I found this one on Christianity Today. And again, it's another one of those Corona adjacent stories because, like we said, everything is Corona related. But one of the, I guess, consequences of the coronavirus is that a lot of conferences are being canceled. And this article highlights 2 of those. With conferences canceled, it says UMC, the United Methodist Church, split, and SBC, the Southern Baptist Church, votes will wait for next year. So the big one, those are the 2 that they highlight, but a lot of pretty much every church denomination, their large gatherings have either been postponed or they're waiting. Some that are in June or even later than that are waiting to postpone. The big one for the United Methodist Church, you may have, if you follow, kind of Christian news at all, there's a split. They were going to vote over irreconcilable differences over the issue of same-sex marriage, kind of like what the ELC did back in 2000. Help me out. What year was that? 10, 11?
The ELCA? 2007, 2008, somewhere around there, yeah.
Okay, earlier than that. Yeah, kind of over the same issues.
I could be completely wrong, but I thought that's around that time frame.
You probably are. You're probably right. But so one of the big voting points this year for the United Methodist Church was for congregations to vote whether or not they were going to stay with the United Methodist Church or to split off over irreconcilable differences. So it calls, they agreed on the protocol of reconciliation and grace through separation. But that vote has been delayed. They have a quadrennial, so every 4 years, conference that this was going to be voted on this year, and that has been postponed. The concern isn't necessarily that churches are going to change their vote, but the concern is for congregants during that time period who may get fed up with waiting and may decide to leave the United Methodist Church entirely and go to a different denomination or something like that. At least that's a concern that's highlighted in this article. And then the other concern with the Southern Baptist Church is they have this whole high-profile issue over sexual abuse in the church. And right now they have, in this meeting they were supposed to hold was to vote whether or not they can have investigative authority or power. Right now the larger church body of the SBC does not have investigative authority into certain congregations. They can only pursue stories that come their way. They can't actively investigate. So those are the 2 big items that are put on hold because of the coronavirus and the conferences being canceled. So I don't know if you have any input.
I do more on the United Methodist aspect of it than the Southern Baptist Convention. And this, I don't even think you knew this, Ben. I got a friend of mine. He's actually been on this show before under its old setup when we used to have a lot of outside guests. And his parents are both clergy within the United Methodist Church, or they were, I should say, because they were out in, I want to say their church was in West Virginia, but they were part of the, I think they're divided up into synods, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong, but I think they were part of the Baltimore Synod. And they refused to perform same-sex marriages. And that was the authorities in Baltimore disagreed with them on that. And it was, I don't want to go into too many details, but the fact of the matter is that they're, whatever they call their book of order, and I don't remember all the names of everything in the United Methodist Church, but it was, and to my understanding, still is very clear on this point. And so they were still in compliance with that. But they ended up getting essentially stripped of their church. And so they have now gone out, and now they've formed another church on their own, where they're the pastors of, or I guess I think the husband is the lead pastor. I can't remember how that it all works and everything. But I got to see through what he was going through a lot of the pain, um, and the difficulty and the struggle that a lot of people go through when issues like this come up, when you've got just such division in the body of Christ. And little personal story. I mean, I kind of went through it myself, and I don't want to get in the business of calling out any other denominations or anything, but my background was I grew up in a different denomination. I was not in the Lutheran Church growing up. I was in another Protestant denomination, and that particular denomination in the early 2000s, or the late 90s, early 2000s, went through a very similar process. And I was one on the ruling board of the church, and I was went to one of these regional meetings. And again, I'm not going to say what it's called because that might give away which denomination I'm talking about. But it was I remember thinking that my pastor at the time and a couple other pastors had gotten together, and they wanted to um, get a proposal going that would bind people together, because the church was so divided, the denomination was so divided, and people were acting in many ways that were really not the ways Christians should be acting. Um, they said, let's propose something that can be affirmed here at this regional meeting that we all agree upon, just to kind of show people where we're still united, to hopefully get us in the right spirit to discuss these issues where we're not. And what they proposed was just something: we're just going to affirm the deity of Christ. That was it. Well, I went to this meeting because I was one of the representatives of my church appointed to represent us at this meeting, and I was all of a sudden, when we got there, I found out that this issue had been designated a controversial issue, and they had this whole special procedure they put into place where we all had to divide up into subgroups and discuss it. And a spokesperson was selected for each subgroup, who had to come back and present the substance of the subgroups discussion to the entire body. Guess who was voted on to be that spokesperson for our group? But I found myself sitting across the table from people who, regardless of how they felt about this other issue, weren't even affirming the deity of Christ. And that was one of the things that inspired me, and realized, no, I've got to move on, and I've got to find another home, as painful as it was for me. So I've lived through that, and I've lived through it from a leadership perspective, and it was very painful, very difficult. And I mean, I still have friends at that church, in that denomination, and that's my biggest concern when I hear stories like you're talking about. Is I am very, I don't know, saddened is the word for it. I don't know what word I'm looking for, but I'm very much aware of the additional pain. I mean, any kind of divorce, if you want to call it that, is always painful. But by pushing this off another year, that there's going to be a lot of pain, that is additional pain that these people are going to be going through. And I my prayers are with them. So that was my thought. Anyway, your turn.
Yeah, absolutely. And you would hope, the hope at least is that this additional year would give, and even the article says this, but the hope is that this additional year would give churches time to focus on what they do agree on, and focus and really gather their thoughts, pray about the issue, and be able to move forward even more concretely. And hopefully, like you said, anytime there's a divorce, if you want to call it that, because it is, or any kind of separation, there is pain involved with that. There's a very real pain, and my heart also goes out to them, because I've seen it, not necessarily firsthand, secondhand. Well, I've seen it kind of in different ways.
At least on a pinky finger, maybe not a whole hand. But
Sure. But well, no, I mean, and I will say my in-laws' church right now, they're United Methodist, and they're going through this as well. And so I kind of see it through them, and kind of the difficult decisions that they're having to make. Now, one good thing, I guess, is that the churches, as far as this is concerned with the United Methodist Church, is that the ones who decide to split are going to keep their buildings, and there's going to be $25 million allocated to those churches for this new congregation, I guess, because to my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, the United Methodist Church, at least proper the way that it is now, has decided to go the way of allowing same-sex marriages, whereas the split is happening that the more conservative folks are splitting and forming a new congregation, so to speak.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. Now, it's interesting you mentioned that they're going to keep the buildings and there's this fund being set aside. Is that what's being voted on, I wonder, at the convention? In other words, is that definitely happening, or is that what they're choosing? Because I will tell you that in the denomination I was part of, that was one of the biggest issues, is that the denomination was being very strict and saying, no, churches, you're not allowed to leave. We're going to take your building. We're going to take all your assets, and you're going to be left with nothing. Which...
The paragraph specifically, I'll cite that, says many UMC churches had already begun to discuss whether to stay or go, with exiting churches keeping their buildings and taking $25 million to form the new denomination under the proposed protocol. So I think it's proposed.
Right. So that must be what they were going to be voting on. That's been delayed for a year now, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Well, but if they're willing to do that, then maybe that can help lessen some of the pain I was worried about, because yes, you got to wait another year, but you're waiting for a year to vote on a process that's going to allow you to keep your church building. Hopefully, if the vote works out, it's going to allow you to keep your assets or have some assets still there available to you. So you can still go on being the church, even though we disagree on this issue. We don't have to deep six anybody,
Right.
So, all right. This is the longest episode of Trinity Talk Live we've ever done, but we still have one more story to go. So we're going to move on to that one. And I'm going to let you introduce this one as well. Since there's only one left, I'm assuming you can deduce which story it is, right, Ben?
Yep.
All right, go for it.
Cool. So this one comes from a website called LifeSite News. And it's interesting. There's a poll. The headline says, almost half of Americans see coronavirus as a wake-up call from God. And it's a poll that was taken. The same poll said that a third of Americans consider the coronavirus panic a sign of the last days. So this basically goes on to, it breaks it down into different areas, but the main percentage that they're citing here says that 44.3% of respondents, and this was a poll that was set out by the Joshua Fund, which is a larger national poll of about 1,000 people. So they have a poll of about 1,000 people. We can talk about sample sizes if you'd like later on. But anyway, at least of this 1,000 people, 44.3% of respondents said that the coronavirus crisis is a wake-up call for us to turn back to faith in God. And it is a sign of coming judgment, or both. So it has this whole breakdown. I won't go through all of the percentages of each, but it includes not just Christian Americans, but Americans of, it seems like every kind of demographic and faith kind of background. At least it has Jewish Americans, secular Americans, a whole bunch of race demographics, age demographics, and things like that. And it seems pretty much all but one are over 35% that believe that it is. So I don't know, what are your thoughts, Ken? Do you think that this...
Do I think it's a sign from God? I'll tell you, when I see something like this, I get a little worried, a little concerned. And I've had some friends too that are saying, well, this is a sign of the end times and all of that. And I keep coming back to what Jesus said. Even he didn't know the time. So, let's slow our roll a little bit. And it's not like this is the first pandemic we've ever faced. It's not a good thing, that's for sure. Could Jesus be coming back tomorrow? Maybe. That's the whole reason he said nobody knows the time. So, I don't know whether he's coming back tomorrow or not. But I have a couple of concerns when I see things like this. Number one is, what do you mean by it's a wake-up call? Is it something that's happening that can certainly get us and inspire people to be thinking about, God more and thinking about Christ more? Yes, absolutely. I mean, I've talked many a times, you and I have talked, I think we talked about last week, how in times like this, people are looking for hope, and we have hope to offer. And so if by wake-up call, that's what you mean, then I'm all on board with it. Yes, absolutely. Is this something that should be getting our attention? Yes, this is absolutely something that should be getting our attention. If by wake-up call you mean that this is a direct act of God to punish X, Y, or Z, my reaction to that is maybe yes, maybe no, but maybe we shouldn't be necessarily going there. I think history is filled with episodes of various different natural disasters, medical issues, things coming up, diseases, where some prominent Christian or another has come on TV and said, this is God taking direct action against this particular group of people. And you're not God. You can't necessarily know. Has God acted that way in history? Yes, he certainly has. We can look in the Old Testament and especially and see examples where God has issued judgment. We can look in the New Testament at you're going to correct me if I'm wrong, Ananias and Sapphira. Am I right on that one?
Yep.
All right, where we see direct action there as a punishment for something that they've done. So yes, that does happen, but when it happens, and the instances where we know that that's happened as a result of God's action, or because God has specifically told us through his prophets or what have you, that happened as a result of his action. And so I worry about people saying this is, when they say this is a wake-up call from God, are you meaning that God specifically sent this virus to, to kill a bunch of people as a judgment against humanity? Well, maybe. We certainly have a lot we need to be judged for. But I don't think we can definitively say that. I think we got to be real careful when we do things like that. Our message is to offer the hope of forgiveness in Jesus Christ to the world. And yes, you don't mention the gospel without mentioning the cross. And there's you've got both the law and gospel in the same message, as part and parcel of the same message. So I'm not saying we don't talk about sin and all that. Absolutely, we do. But we just got to be careful about how much we can reasonably conclude just from the fact we're facing a pandemic. There was another thing that this article mentioned that caught my attention. Right underneath all those percentages you're talking about, it says, moreover, 29% of respondents said they believe that this crisis indicates that we are living in what the Bible calls the last days. Well, I agree. We are living in the last days in the sense that, Jesus has already come. He's been resurrected. He's ascended. And so these are the last days, in the sense that these are the last set of days. And the next thing that's going to happen is going to be his return, or depending on your denominational preference, the rapture and all that. But I'm not going to go there. So we are in the last days, but I'm assuming what most people, when they respond and they mean by that, is they think that we are, whether if you're a premillennialist or whatever, the rapture is about to happen imminently. And again, that's where we get back to, Jesus says no one can know the day. Even he didn't know the day. Only the Father knows the day. And so we need to be cautious about many, many times throughout history, we've had prominent Christians or not so prominent Christians saying, Jesus is coming back on October 2nd, 1947 or whatever. And it hasn't happened. And when we say things like that, and to the non-believing world, they hear things like that, it does affect the credibility of the gospel message when those things don't happen, because the non-believing world doesn't necessarily do a great job of distinguishing between, shall we say, true gospel preachers and false gospel preachers. And so if we are a true believer and we do really accepted Jesus Christ, we need to be very cautious about jumping to those kind of conclusions. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. So we don't know. And we shouldn't be so definitive about it. Anyway, that's my thoughts. There you go.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think anytime that you see somebody, and crisis times are especially rampant with people setting dates and saying the end is near and all of that. So anytime you see a specific date for something, I think that's a pretty good indicator that it won't happen on that day, because Jesus didn't even know. So, but at the same time, there are signs. And I do think, like you said, we are in the last days, in the sense that Christ has already risen. He's already fulfilled his purpose on the earth. And so the next thing that will happen is that he's coming back. And so, yes, I agree with that. The other thing that I kind of thought about this article was that people saying that it's a wake-up call from God. And I think it's interesting that whenever a crisis occurs, that's when people consider it a wake-up call from God. When scripturally speaking, every day is a wake-up call from God, right? Yeah. Every day, God's mercy is new each and every day, right? And it is his mercy, his patience, his kindness, his forbearance. Look at Romans 2:4. It says it's God's kindness that leads us to repentance. God, or 2 Peter 3:9, it says the Lord is not slow considering his promises, as some consider slowness, but instead he's patient with you, not desiring that any should perish, but all should come to repentance. And so his patience, his forbearance, the fact that he isn't sending a calamity to judge us, is showing us that he is waiting on our repentance. And so every day that we wake up with breath in our lungs, it's because God has decided to allow us that new day and give us a new chance to repent. And so I think it's always interesting when, can something like this shake people and wake them up? Absolutely. And I think some people are coming to God. And even this article states some people are turning to sermons like that are online, even for the first time. That's great. Any exposure that they can get, provided that the sermons they're turning to are a true gospel, like you had mentioned, as opposed to a false gospel. I think anything that will reach people, God is not, he's not in a box. He can use any kind of, he spoke through a donkey, right, to reach Balaam. And so he's been doing it ever since.
Wait a minute. I'm telling Pastor Jay you said that.
I wasn't saying about him. I'm just saying, in general, he's been speaking through animals. But no, God can use whatever means to reach us. But I think especially as Christians, we should be pointing people all the more. The harvest is ready, regardless of whether Jesus is coming back today or tomorrow or in 20 years. I think we should always be prepared. And that's kind of the takeaway from this.
Yeah. Well, we've gone on long enough. How long have we been on the air now? What time is it? It's like 1 o'clock. We've been on for like an hour. This is like the longest episode ever. So that's great. We managed to stay, I think, coronavirus adjacent at least, which was our goal. I want to thank everybody for watching here today. Fortunately, I'm going to take these headphones off again because, again, if you haven't watched from the beginning, I hear myself and a slight delay gives me a headache. So I do want to thank everybody for watching. Fortunately, I apologize again for all the technical issues we had at the very beginning of the program. But at least as far as I've been able to tell, and my wife's been able to see the screen more than I have, I think they've worked out reasonably well, with the exception that we had to switch my mic, obviously, so my audio quality probably isn't as good as it usually is. But other than that, I think all the technical issues pretty much worked themselves out. No, they didn't work themselves out. We worked them out. But we didn't have anything else, any other difficulties.
With the help of God.
With the help of God. See? Oh, yes, this was definitely... No, we're not going to go there. So anyway, so thank you all very much for watching. Important announcement. Next week is when we would normally be airing this. We do it on Mondays at noon, and normally would be the next Monday at noon is the day after Easter. Well, typically speaking, for us, those of us here at Trinity, and probably for a lot of church workers all over the country, if not the world, that's like one of the few days off we get in the year. So we actually are, and it's also something special, which I'm not going to share. It's Ben's to share if he wants to share what else. Do you want to share what else the Monday is?
Sure. That's also my son Levi's birthday.
Happy birthday, Levi!
Happy birthday,
Levi!
So, whoa! What happened to your phone there?
I got too excited.
So anyway, so we are not going to have an episode next week. That's a long way of saying no episode next week. We will be back in 2 weeks, though, here on Monday at noon. So no idea what we'll be talking about because so much can happen between now and 2 weeks from now. I think, what's the date today? Today is the 6th. Is that right? So 2 weeks from now is the 20th, right? Am I doing that? Yeah. 6 plus 14, right? We're good. Okay.
Yep.
So the kids still won't be back in school, even if they do have their official, what we're saying right now, through April 26th? Is that what 24th is what the county's saying? So yeah, it's probably going to be an episode a lot like today, where we're still going to be, even if everything goes beautifully according to what the Maryland Department of Education is currently saying, the kids will still be here. We'll still be dealing with Corona-adjacent stories. But who knows? Who knows what's going to happen the next 2 weeks? But we hope you can join us. We thank you very much for joining us today. Andrew Kasuf says happy birthday to Levi on the live chat. Thank you, Andrew.
I'll make sure to
and
pass
he
it along.
Says Elisha's is Sunday. Wow, so happy birthday as well. There's birthdays going around all over the place. So do you want to sing, Ben?
Sure, let's sing to Elisha.
No, not let's sing, just you. You go.
Oh, no. Happy birthday to you.
No.
Happy birthday.
We don't have the rights.
Oh, that's right. Don't want to get a copy? I thought that got cleared up. I thought you could sing that now.
I don't know it.
All right. Well,
only when you're washing your hands.
Happy birthday. Yeah, isn't that one of those things that you sing happy birthday while you're washing your hands? It takes you how long you're supposed to be doing it. So, hey, this episode's already gone long. We're just making it go longer. So I'm going to sign off here. I'm going to let someone say goodbye. It's okay. I always let them say goodbye.
Okay.
All right, say goodbye, Ben.
Goodbye, Ben.
All right. And thank you all for watching. Goodbye, everybody. God bless.